college football, the NIL market for each position in the transfer portal. Now, this also does pertain to players being retained on their roster and not going to the transfer portal. They said that in the article, but John Talty, however you say that, he went out and talked to NIL collectives. He went out and talked to administrators and schools and tried to figure out what is a good range for most players in the transfer portal. He did say there were some exceptions, guys like Dylan Gabriel. I think, there was another one, DJ Uyunglele, I think was another one that he mentioned. That was probably more than these ranges, but for the most part, the most players that are in the transfer portal, these are the ranges that you find. Zach, you tell me, man, are you agreeing with these or not? No, we'll get to that in a second. What position range here surprised you the most?
Honestly, I think wide receiver. And I can understand some of his logic. Like you play anywhere from 2 to 4 in most college teams in most of their pro sets. But I would imagine, I think it was Jeremiah Smith who it seemed like they were waiting to get the deal signed at Ohio State for his paperwork to go in. I have a sinking suspicion it was not $300,000. Maybe it was. I doubt it. And I
tend to agree.
Yeah, I think the high level receivers are making quite a bit more, especially if you're pairing them with a high level quarterback, who I also thinking is probably making more than $800,000.
Yeah, no, and that was my wonder as well, is what are the ranges for recruits? Because in my thought, recruits might be making more money than transfer portal players sometimes. Even though the transfer portal players are proven, you still get this idea of 5-star recruit and what they can be. And really that's what your program is kind of built off of is your recruits and how you're able to develop them. But Max, your thoughts on what position range here surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think the first thing that jumped out was maybe the DB market just being a little bit lower than I expected. I mean, you think, to your point, Zach, like, high-end wide receiver, if you have to defend these high-end wide receivers, you'd think you'd be paying those guys to defend them an equal amount to try to stop them. But I think just from looking at it from you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to find all those top-end guys in the portal anyways, and they're kind of few and far between, whereas, if you can pick up one of the top offensive tackles, I mean, it's kind of like the NFL, comparing it to, the quarterback makes the most and the best guy protected is going to make the next amount. Yeah, I think that the only other thing that surprised me was just the range of the O-line market. You're telling me that the lower end offensive lineman is going to make more than a top end wide receiver or running back. I think that surprised me a little bit, but probably depends on, who all is available and what all is out there, what the market actually looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm an offensive lineman, even if I just had a terrible year, if I started like in the MAC, I'm going in the portal, right? There are some lower level Power 4 teams out there that might be sending you $350K. I mean, and at the end of the day, you're not going to get that if you were in the MAC or something like that. But if you go to, I don't know, name your school, Boston College, Iowa State or something like that, you might be looking at, some kind of amount there. Russ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think maybe the wide receivers includes tight ends too. Is that a possibility? Because I don't see tight ends on there, so maybe that's why the low end is low.
I searched tight ends and I couldn't find anything on them. That was my thought, was maybe wide receivers included them too, but I couldn't find anything on them.
But yeah, I agree with Zach. The high end wide receivers have to be far above that top end of that range. But wide receivers are, usually you see a lot of college rosters that have 10, 12, 15 wide receivers listed. So I can see how those are kind of like, just take your shots, throw a bunch of darts at the board, and the guys that do well are going to move up, and the guys that don't, will maybe fill the position the next year. But an O-line similar. I think that's why the range is so tight. There's O-line is just about compiling size. You got to get bodies, and that's something we've talked about with Purdue a lot in this offseason is, we had so many different offensive line setups in single games, not just throughout the course of the season. Some programs can keep them healthy all year long, but, the college game has just gotten much more physical, especially in the trenches. And so you've got to, you got to be deep at O-line and you've got to stockpile those bodies. And I think that's why it's kind of more flat range there. Yeah, running backs, I would expect too, because it's, college is still a little bit old school. You still got to be able to run the football. People are excited about throwing the ball over the yard and playing basketball on grass, but I would expect the running back market to be a little bit higher than what that is. But everything else, kind of makes a little sense. You want your offensive line to probably be the second highest paid kind of group behind your quarterback group, because you got to protect them to be able to do anything. But yeah, that's kind of what I see.
Zach, is it possible that some of these NIL collective leaders and these administrators, they talked to John Talty, however you say his last name here, and they were like, yeah, we pay them about this much. Of course, this is about what NIL is. And is it possible they were lying about it being so low? I mean, I would think they'd be lying about it being way higher, personally, because it's like, guys, you got to donate to this collective. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, dude, our collective is fine. What are you talking about? Like some of these topics, Caleb Downs only made $225,000 coming out of the portal to Ohio State. Like, I feel like if they were going to be lying and be inaccurate, they would be giving you a higher end, but these numbers just seem so low to me. How many quarterbacks have we heard that go for $1 million in the transfer portal and stuff like that? What do you think, Zach?
Well, I do think I think there's a bit of a cat and mouse game here, regardless whether it's higher or lower, and that's not just including this article. I think that's including when you hear about quarterbacks making millions of dollars. There's a reality that there's only a few programs that really can, if they wanted to offer everybody $1 million, like there's only a few programs that could do that. And so I think that the Uber recruit, like the Uber talents, like they're certainly making more than the high end, right? Guys like Dylan Gabriel. I think it said in the article, back to Max's point, that high end corners might double that range of, instead of 225, it might be 450. But you do have to realize a couple things. One, you still have to deal through a collective and not the school itself. And so it really does depend on how much money is being raised by the collective. And so depending on the school, Ohio State is going to have a much higher collective than, say, Northwestern, for instance. And so that's going to be, I think, a big thing. And then I think on top of that, there's just like I was just doing the math quickly. If you went the high end for all your starters, you're talking about 10 mil. And I'm like, that, like, I think when you start to break it down, you realize, oh, that's individually, it's not, it doesn't seem like a lot, although all of us would probably love to make $800,000. But I think collectively it really starts to add up. And then you think your roster is like 85 to 100 players. Now, not all of them are making that high end, but so I wouldn't say that they're being completely truthful, but I don't, maybe this is my naivety or my naiveness, but I think it's probably closer to true than it is like really, really like a huge farce.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I think, one player that I think about pretty frequently, or not, I guess not frequently, but quite a bit with this market range here is somebody like Max Brosmer, who went to Minnesota, right, Max? I mean, like, this is somebody who was one of the best quarterbacks in FCS last year, and now he's coming to Minnesota. And, it's one thing to be one of the best quarterbacks in FBS, but to be one of the best in FCS, is this going to be somebody that gets paid the high 800,000, or are they going to get paid more? I don't know. Max, you guys just brought in a very high profile quarterback in Max Brosmer. Do you feel like this quarterback market range that they've given here is accurate for what he is most likely making?
I mean, good for him if it is, but I feel like he's probably probably below what the market range shows, like you said, just because he is coming from FCS. And I think I would just knowing, how much PJ Fleck has talked about how much more money that our program's NIL collective needs to raise. I would be surprised if we then turn around and gave a huge chunk of that to a guy like Max Brosmer. But at the same time, I mean, that could just be PJ, playing the game of, oh, we need more. We don't have enough to keep, the blessed players that we have. So maybe he did fool us. I don't know. But yeah, if I had to bet, I would guess he's definitely below what this range lists, just because he's coming from a lower level and is pretty unproven at this point.
Well, no coach is going to tell everybody like, "Hey, we've met our NIL goal this year, right?" Like,
right.
Great job, everybody. You can stop donating now. I would love to hear a coach come out and say that and see what the reaction would be. Russ, Dylan is still needing his NIL from BXP. So,
He's buying horses. He's got plenty of money. He's good.
I was going to say, I know that you run the NIL for Boiler Express. So, make sure you get on that with him. But any final thoughts with this, Russ? I mean, we talked about the accuracy of Max Brosmer and just all these different things. Any more thoughts on if you think this is accurate or not?
Yeah, like Max just kind of touched on there. I think that this is getting much more kind of political. Like these coaches are sound like politicians now. They only want to report what they want you to hear. They're all going to make it sound like they're poor and need more money. Like everybody's, it's just a mind game now at this point. Like, I think it's very likely they could have underestimated what this range was. That way, when they bring a quarterback in, they can go, "Hey, Zack, look, this is the QB range, but we like you so much, we're going to pay you $1 million. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, this is the wide receiver range, but we're going to pay you 400. Look, see, this is the estimated, but I think that might have been the game that was getting played was, hey, let's undershoot it so that when we bring guys in, we just, hey, sign on the paper, sign here, don't take your other visits, just stay here, like you're good. Yeah. But you're going to have a lot of guys like Minnesota and Max was talking about there that, or maybe they're jumping up from FCS that you don't have to pay in that range because they're getting their shot. Like they aren't somebody that was high profile that, transferred from a USC or Oklahoma. You're getting an FCS guy that has a shot. Like, yeah, you can definitely get a quarterback for 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 probably from that stage. And then if they do well, then you're talking about having to raise NIL money to either keep them there or they're going to go take a bigger payday elsewhere.
Very true. Very true. So, Dylan's calling you out again, Russ. You do our financials. That's why you make zero. So, and also Dylan, come back on Saturday. We'll have another one Saturday where we talk about NCAA and stuff like that. That's the national show. But